Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Domestic Revolution, How the Introduction of Coal into Victorian Homes Changed Everything, by Ruth Goodman. Narrated by Jennifer M. Dixon. Publisher's note. This audiobook refers to illustrations included in the print and e-book editions of the book. Forward. Lived history. About 10 years ago, for the purpose of making a TV program, I found myself standing in front of a newly refitted coal-fired iron range. It was part of a semi-derelict cottage into which we'd already put a huge amount of work, rebuilding a staircase, replastering walls, renewing windows and doors, and relaying a floor. We then inserted a salvaged range, giving it a thorough overhaul before gently easing it into its new home. Brickwork was adjusted around it, then all the gaps were sealed. We gathered round as the first fire was lit and became a tad overexcited when smoke began issuing from the chimney with barely a wisp visible in the kitchen. The programme we were making required me and my 2 colleagues to run a small farm for a year, in the manner typical of British people in the second half of the 19th century. As the woman on the team, and following on from Victorian practice, this black metal box and its dirty black fuel were to be my responsibility. I had never cooked on coal before. I did, however, have a great deal of experience working with wood fires, including for a previous TV series that had run for a year, as well as 20 years' worth of weekends and short breaks in various structures and open spaces. I felt fairly confident that a coal range would be well within my capabilities. Well, I managed it, but the encounter was much more challenging and interesting than I had anticipated, and it was one that encompassed much more than cooking. The radically different practices involved in running a coal-fired home in comparison to running a wood-fired one took me completely by surprise. So many things that I had taken for granted suddenly became immediate and pressing issues. The challenges that I was facing and the adjustments I was having to make as I learnt to deal with coal were wide-reaching. When I considered the impact such changes must have had, when multiplied by the number of households that had made these changes in the past, it was mind-boggling. I began to realize that the usual narratives about the development of the home, the countryside, and the modern industrial world were missing something. The big switch to domestic coal in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. In many ways, I was in a highly unusual position. Most people experimenting with the use of coal as a fuel are approaching the problem from a modern perspective, making comparisons with gas and electricity. Our attitudes and assumptions are necessarily backwards-looking. But much of my experience came from older technologies. I have probably cooked more meals over a wood fire than I have over gas or electric cookers. I have certainly cleaned more houses heated by open wood fires than those with central heating, and long ago adapted my laundry regime to something inspired by earlier methods. My engagement with the great outdoors was almost entirely framed by historical experiment and experience, with weekends spent felling trees with axes and cross-cut saws, coppicing patches of woodland, building period styles of fencing and growing heirloom plants. Looking at the world through wood-burning eyes was second nature to me. From this vantage it was obvious to me that the switch to coal would have had a huge impact on the daily routines of people from all walks of life. I first became aware that some of the practical skills I was learning could genuinely form a useful addition to the scholarly understanding of this history when I was invited to help out some 20 years ago at the Mary Rose Trust. This charity is charged with caring for the archaeological remains of Henry VIII's flagship, which sank as he watched from the shore in the strait between the Isle of Wight and the English mainland on the 19th of July, 1545. The excavation of the flagship's remains had revealed 2 brick structures sitting upon some loose gravel ballast at the ship's bottom, on either side of a central keel beam. These were assumed to be the galleys. However, when the ship reached the seabed upon that fateful day, nearly 500 years ago, it had tipped over onto one side, sending one of the 2 galley structures crashing over on top of the other. The excavations had thus mostly uncovered a mass of rubble. The Trust had launched a project to reconstruct the cooking facilities and provide a better picture of life on board a mid-Tudor warship. A great deal of thought and effort went into the work. Bricks, mortar, iron bars, flashings and metal pots were sampled and analysed. Reconstructions were made using techniques and materials that were as close to those available in the original period as possible. Wherever the original form had survived the passage of time, it was closely copied. The structures were square in plan, with an open firebox door on one side, and each held a single large metal pot supported in part by 2 iron bars. When I saw them, I thought they resembled the laundry coppers common in outhouses in Edwardian days, although they did not have the iron grate and iron door usually found in these more recent domestic conveniences. When all of the building work was completed, I was invited to reconstruct how the cooking structure might have been used. I had at that point about 10 years' experience with 16th century kitchen equipment, utilising both wood and charcoal, and I had been researching and practising the techniques and recipes of the era. I couldn't wait to get cooking. My first meeting with the project's lead archaeologist was exciting. I learnt that not only had the 2 galley structures survived, albeit in fragmentary form, but so too had an array of cooking vessels and equipment, barrels with the remains of butchered meat and fish, a scattering of grains, various other plant materials, including whole peppercorns, and perhaps most remarkable of all, the firewood to cook it upon. I was extremely eager to see this mass of physical evidence, but to begin, I was handed the team's drawings of the reconstructed galley. "Oh, it's got a flue," I exclaimed. I was quite surprised by this development. All of my previous work had indicated that flues and chimneys were rarely introduced into ovens, kilns, furnaces and other enclosed fireboxes when wood was burnt. Practical experience had shown me flues and chimneys were, in most cases, not only unnecessary but actively counterproductive, as, along with the smoke, they channeled all of the heat up and away from where it was wanted. I wanted to see the photos of the underwater excavation site to get a sense for the dimensions and shape of these remarkable survivals. What was special about shipboard conditions, I wondered, that made a flue desirable? The answer, it turned out, was nothing. The reconstruction team had simply assumed there must have been a flue. Since there was no sign of any metal or brick cowling or chimney, they guessed a vent had been situated at the top of each cooking structure's brickwork and had not survived the wreck. It was not such a preposterous assumption. Many old ovens and kilns had flues, but these ovens and kilns dated to the 19th and 20th centuries, and they had burnt coal, not wood. Over a series of visits, I was able to demonstrate how the fuel, fire, and structure worked, both with the contentious flue in place and with it sealed up. When we filled a cauldron with water and lit a fire within the furnace, with the flue in place, the experience was dismal. 4.5 hours of vigorous flame barely brought the pot of water to a simmer. Meanwhile, the air temperature around the vent was scorchingly hot, too hot, in fact, for our thermometer to register. We were past the top of the scale after 15 minutes.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?